Part 1. The ordinary day turns strange. I had just moved into the house. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to call my own after years of living with roommates. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees and a small park. It was the kind of place you dream about after years of noisy apartments and cramped living spaces. I was excited to settle in, to unpack my things, and to find some peace. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking, setting up furniture, and adjusting to the silence. I remember walking through the house, admiring how calm it felt. No more sharing walls with loud neighbors. No more being woken up by a car alarm blaring outside my window. Just peace. The house itself had a history. It was an older place with creaky floors and windows that didn't quite close properly. It wasn't anything major, just the little quirks that come with living in a house that had been around for a while. I didn't mind them. In fact, I found the imperfections comforting. But on the third night, things began to change. I was lying in bed, just drifting off to sleep when I thought I saw something. A shadow. It wasn't distinct, but I caught the briefest glimpse of it through the corner of my eye. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Just the reflection of a tree outside or my imagination running wild in the darkness. But the more I thought about it, the less convinced I became. Something about it didn't feel right. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I had just moved into a new place. I was adjusting. But that night, the shadow appeared again. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel my pulse quickening as I turned my head slowly toward the window. The faintest outline of something moved, too subtle to catch in full, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. It looked like a figure, standing still in the darkness, just outside the window. I stood up, heart racing, and walked over to the window. I drew back the blinds and looked outside. Nothing. Just the streetlights casting their pale glow over the empty sidewalk. I was trying to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light. Maybe a branch had moved, or maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next night, the same thing happened. I saw the shadow again, flickering outside the window. My heartbeat started to speed up. I told myself it was nothing, just a figment of my imagination, something to shake off. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. It was as if the shadow was waiting for me, watching me from the other side of the glass. That's when I first started to feel the unease settle into my chest. It was subtle at first, just a creeping sensation that I was being observed. The thought was ridiculous. I knew it was. But it was there, growing stronger every day. I tried to ignore it. After all, I was just settling in. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. But that was the thing about fear, wasn't it? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to. I don't know when it started, but after a while I began to hear sounds at night. Quiet sounds, tapping, a scraping noise coming from outside my window. The first time I thought it was just an animal, maybe a cat or a raccoon, something that had wandered into the yard. But each night, the noise grew more distinct. It wasn't a random tapping. It was rhythmic, persistent. I felt that feeling again, the feeling of being watched. I walked to the window again. This time I didn't hesitate. I pulled back the blinds and scanned the yard. The darkness stretched out before me, and there was no sign of anyone or anything. Just shadows. The noise stopped abruptly, as if whatever it was knew I was watching, and for a moment everything felt completely still. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing down on me. The feeling that something was watching, waiting, never left me. But as the days passed, I began to convince myself that it was all in my head. A few creaky floorboards, an old house settling, nothing to be afraid of. Yet the more I tried to brush it off, the stronger the feeling became. It was like there was something out there, just beyond the window, waiting. The shadows outside the window were no longer just shadows. Part 2. Escalating insecurity. Days passed, and I thought I could shake off the creeping feeling. I started to convince myself that it was just a phase, adjusting to a new place, getting used to the sounds of an older home. But deep down, something had changed. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt wrong. It started innocently enough. I noticed that every time I would walk through the house, my steps seemed louder than they should be. I would pause, wondering if I heard something, a faint tapping sound, a soft shuffle, but when I checked, there was nothing. The first few times, I brushed it off as the house settling, but as the days went by, the sensation of being followed grew stronger. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the couch reading a book, I felt it again. The unmistakable prickling on the back of my neck. That eerie sensation that someone was watching me, but I was alone in the house. I looked up, and my eyes instinctively shifted toward the window. There, just outside, was the shadow. It wasn't just a fleeting movement now. It was more distinct, as if someone was standing still, watching. I told myself it was just the trees casting strange shadows, but I knew that wasn't true. The figure outside wasn't part of the natural landscape. There was no way the shadows could form like that. Something was there, standing in the darkness, waiting. I tried to dismiss it. "You're being paranoid," I told myself, but the unease only grew. At night, when the house fell silent, I could hear it, a scraping sound against the glass. At first it was faint, but as the days wore on, it became more pronounced. The noise was methodical, almost deliberate. I would freeze, my heart pounding, every time I heard it. One night, unable to take it any longer, I decided to check the window again. I pulled back the blinds, and this time I saw something different. There wasn't just a shadow. This time I could make out a faint outline of a figure, a man, or something resembling one. It wasn't clear, but the impression was unmistakable. I quickly shut the blinds, my hands shaking. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt that gnawing unease settle in the pit of my stomach. The next morning, I decided to take a walk around the yard, hoping to clear my mind. I needed to reassure myself that I wasn't losing touch with reality. But when I reached the back of the house, I froze. There in the dirt beside the window were faint, muddy footprints. They weren't the kind of footprints you would expect from a passerby or an animal. These were too deliberate, too purposeful. They led directly to the window where I'd seen the shadow. And then, just as I began to follow them, they abruptly stopped. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stood there, frozen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized what this meant. Someone had been outside my window. Someone had been watching me. I rushed back inside, locking the doors behind me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I knew now. Whatever had been watching me, whatever had been leaving those footprints, wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was still out there. Over the next few days, the shadow became a constant presence. I couldn't shake it. It wasn't just at night anymore. During the day, I would catch glimpses of it, out of the corner of my eye. A fleeting figure, always at the window, always just outside my line of sight. I began to notice something even stranger. There was no movement. The figure didn't seem to move, just stand there, watching. There was no rustling of leaves, no sound of footsteps, just that eerie stillness, like something waiting for me to notice. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every night, I would hear the scraping noise, getting louder, closer. My heartbeat would spike as I stared at the window, dreading the moment I would pull back the blinds again and face whatever was waiting. And then, one day, I heard a voice. It was faint, just a whisper, coming from the other side of the window. "Come outside." The voice was calm, too calm. My blood ran cold. I ran to the window and flung the blinds open, but once again, there was nothing there. No figure, no shadow, just the empty street bathed in the pale light of the street lamps. But the voice had been real. I knew it. I had heard it. I felt a panic rise in my chest. The feeling of being watched, of being trapped in my own home, was too much. I couldn't stay here anymore. But when I looked around, all I could see were the same familiar walls, the same windows, the same shadows. I didn't know who or what was watching me, but I could feel it, every night, every moment. And I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Part 3, the climax and chilling conclusion. I couldn't sleep that night, the fear, the unease, it was overwhelming. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body tingling with the sensation of being watched. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, the product of a new environment, of being alone in a house that felt far too big. But deep down I knew something was terribly wrong. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic, like a finger lightly tapping against the glass. I tried to ignore it, to turn my mind elsewhere, but it was impossible. The sound was too deliberate, too insistent. My heart raced as I quietly crept out of bed. I tiptoed to the window, my breath shallow, trying not to make a sound. I could feel the sweat forming on the back of my neck, the terror building with every step. The noise stopped as I reached the window, as if the thing, whatever it was, knew I was coming. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled back the blinds. My eyes scanned the yard, the streetlight casting a pale, ghostly glow on everything. At first, I saw nothing, just the quiet, empty street. But then I caught it, the faintest outline of a figure, standing in the darkness just beyond the window. I gasped, my body freezing in place. It wasn't a shadow anymore. This time it was a man, or something that resembled one. He was tall, his face obscured in darkness, but I could see his outline clearly. He was standing motionless, just a few feet from the window. A cold wave of panic washed over me. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew, without a doubt, that he had been watching me. He had been there all along. Suddenly, the figure moved. It was slow at first, but then it lunged forward, pressing its face against the glass. I froze, my entire body paralyzed with terror. There were no words, no sounds, just the dark figure staring back at me with cold, empty eyes. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, the figure began to speak. It was a voice like none I had ever heard before, cold, raspy, and distant, as if it came from the depths of the earth. "You're not safe here." The words echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine. I stumbled back, falling to the ground. My pulse was deafening in my ears. I couldn't think. I couldn't react. My body was frozen, locked in place by the sheer terror of it all. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. There was no movement, no rustling of the trees, no footsteps. It was as if the figure had simply dissolved into the air, leaving me alone once more. I didn't wait for another second. I grabbed my phone and called a friend. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. "I need to get out of here," I whispered, my voice trembling. They didn't understand at first, but after hearing the panic in my voice, they agreed to come pick me up. I didn't care where we went. I just needed to leave. I didn't even bother locking the door as I left. I grabbed my things in a rush, and with trembling hands, I locked the door behind me. The fear wasn't just in the house anymore. It was in the air around me, following me, suffocating me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. When I got to my friend's house, I thought the worst was over, but it wasn't. For the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I left the house, I would check over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark figure lurking just behind me. Every time I walked down the street, I would feel eyes on me. I couldn't escape it. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I even called the police, but they found no evidence. No signs of a break-in, no strange activity, just an empty house, waiting for me to return. They told me to calm down. They said I was imagining things, but I knew better. When I returned to the house to grab a few more of my things, I was careful. I stayed away from the windows, stayed in the middle of the room, making sure nothing could surprise me. But as I passed the window, I saw it again. Just the faintest shadow. I couldn't stay. Not there. Not in that house. I moved away soon after. I found a new place, somewhere far from the quiet neighborhood, far from the house that had become a prison. But I'll never forget the eyes, those cold, empty eyes staring at me through the window, watching me in the dark. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel it. That sensation of being watched, the coldness creeping in from the edges of my vision, just beyond my reach. And every now and then, I wonder, was it ever really over? Part 1. A routine walk gone wrong. It was just a regular day. I had finished my work and decided to take a walk in the park. It was a quiet place, the kind of park that felt familiar and safe, with its walking paths and tall trees casting long shadows over the benches. I went there often to clear my mind and get away from the noise of the city. I wasn't looking for anything unusual. I just needed to be outside. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. The cool breeze cut through the warm air, making the trees sway gently. It was peaceful, and for a moment, everything felt right. As I walked along the familiar path, something caught my eye. There, just ahead, was a man sitting on one of the benches. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, the park wasn't exactly empty. There were always people around, joggers, dog walkers, kids playing on the swings. But there was something off about this man. He was sitting still, his back straight, his face turned slightly toward me. He wasn't moving. And it wasn't just his stillness that caught my attention. It was the way he seemed to be staring, not at the trees or the path or the birds flitting above. He was staring directly at me. I didn't want to think too much about it. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe he was deep in thought. But as I walked closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man didn't smile, didn't acknowledge me in any way. He just sat there, watching, unmoving. His clothes were old, a worn-out jacket and scuffed shoes. His hair was messy, but there was something about his presence that made me feel uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off. It was probably nothing. But then as I passed by, he shifted his gaze slightly, following me as I walked. His eyes didn't just glance in my direction, they locked onto mine. I didn't know why, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly turned my head and walked faster, hoping the feeling would fade. But it didn't. I kept walking, trying to ignore the strange sensation creeping up my back, but I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. Every time I did, I saw him still sitting there, his eyes fixed on me. It was like he wasn't just watching me, he was waiting for something. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But the feeling persisted. The deeper I went into the park, the more I felt it, like I was being followed, like someone was just a few steps behind me, no matter how fast I walked. I turned a corner onto a narrower path, hoping to lose him in the maze of trees and bushes. But when I looked back, he was still there. The man, watching. It wasn't just the way he stared, it was the way he never moved. The way he remained perfectly still, as if time didn't matter to him. And when I reached the end of the path and turned back to head home, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, still watching. I picked up the pace, walking faster now, desperate to get away from the eerie presence. But every time I glanced over my shoulder, there he was, standing at the edge of the path, just outside the shadows of the trees. I couldn't help it. My heart started racing. There was something deeply unsettling about this man. Something that told me he wasn't just a passerby. I quickened my pace, trying not to look back again, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It followed me, pressing on my chest like an invisible weight. I was almost out of the park when I turned one last time, desperate for confirmation that he wasn't there. But he was. The man was standing right behind me. Part 2. Growing tension. The moment I saw him standing behind me, my heart skipped a beat. I froze. It didn't make sense. I had been walking at a steady pace, and I hadn't heard any footsteps, no rustling of leaves. Nothing. Yet there he was, just a few feet behind me, his eyes locked onto mine. The same unnerving, unmoving stare. My body was on autopilot. I took a few hesitant steps forward, not daring to turn around, but I could feel the tension rising in the air. Every step felt heavier, like I was being pulled back, tethered by his gaze. His eyes followed me, unblinking. I didn't dare look over my shoulder again. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the blood rushing to my ears. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. I had no reason to be scared. After all, it was just a park. There were people around. But when I passed by a couple walking their dog, I realized I was still alone. They didn't seem to notice anything unusual. The park was as peaceful as it had always been, except for him. Every time I checked behind me, there he was. At first, he was at the far end of the path, just a shadow in the distance. But as I moved, he seemed to be closer, always a step behind. I couldn't outrun him. No matter how fast I walked, it felt like he was always there, silently following me. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but my hands trembled too much to even reach for my phone. I looked at the sky, trying to distract myself. The sun had nearly dipped below the horizon, and the park was starting to empty out, leaving me with nothing but the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The man didn't speak. He didn't move. But there was something in the way he followed me, something that felt deliberate, like he was testing me, playing some twisted game. I couldn't figure out what he wanted, but I knew he wasn't going to let me leave the park unscathed. I turned down another path, hoping to lose him in the twists and turns, but no matter where I went, he was always behind me. It was as if he knew the park better than I did. Finally, I reached a secluded spot, a corner of the park where the trees grew thick and the last of the sunlight barely filtered through. It was dark now. I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the city, but everything felt eerily quiet. I stood there for a moment, gathering my courage. Maybe if I stayed still, if I just stopped moving, he would stop following me. But I was wrong. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, getting closer. It was the sound of him approaching. I turned quickly, expecting to see him right there. But when I looked, he wasn't there. I could feel my heart in my throat. It didn't make sense. He had been so close just moments ago. I took another step, trying to shake off the feeling of being suffocated by silence. And then, just as I was about to move again, I heard his voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a shout, but it was clear enough to send a chill down my spine. "Why are you running from me?" The words were cold, almost mocking, as if he had been watching me struggle, watching me try to escape. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I turned around slowly, dreading what I might see. There he was, not too far behind me. But now, he was closer than ever. He wasn't just walking now, he was moving toward me, his pace steady and unhurried. His expression was unreadable, his eyes blank, but there was something about his posture, his presence, that felt menacing. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. I couldn't seem to make my body move fast enough. The fear was paralyzing. "I told you," he said again, his voice soft but steady. "You can't get away from me." It was then that I realized something else. There was no one else in the park anymore. The evening joggers, the families walking their dogs, they were all gone. It was just the two of us now. He was the only one left. Panic surged through me, and I started walking faster, then running. My feet pounded against the path, the sound of my own heartbeat ringing in my ears. I didn't look back this time. I couldn't. But I could hear his footsteps behind me, growing closer, always just a little too close. I didn't know how far I ran or how much time passed. All I could think about was getting away from him. But no matter how fast I went, the feeling of him was always there, right behind me. Eventually I reached the park's exit. I looked up and saw the streetlights, the familiar sight of the city beyond. I sprinted toward them, not daring to glance behind me. When I reached the sidewalk, I didn't stop. I kept running, my breath ragged, my body on fire with adrenaline. It wasn't until I reached my apartment that I finally dared to slow down. I locked the door behind me, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. I was safe. At least I thought I was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting for me, following me. I never went back to that park. But every time I pass it now, I can't help but wonder, what did he want? And why did he follow me? I haven't been able to find out, and I don't think I ever will. Part 3, Climax and Revelation. The weeks following that night were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the man from the park was somehow still there, lingering in the shadows of my everyday life. I thought about him constantly. His voice, the way he seemed to know exactly how I would react, his unnerving stillness, it all haunted me, even when I wasn't consciously thinking about it. I did my best to continue with my routine, but the dread never fully left me. Every time I stepped outside, I would glance around, half expecting to see him standing there, lurking in the distance. Every unfamiliar face on the street felt like a threat. The world seemed smaller, more dangerous. I tried to put it out of my mind. I stopped going to the park. I didn't walk through that area anymore, and I avoided any place that reminded me of that night. But the unsettling sensation never left. It followed me, like a shadow that wouldn't disappear, no matter how much sunlight I sought. Then, one evening, I saw him again. I was walking home from work, passing a small corner store, when I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the shop window. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me, and I glanced up. There, standing across the street, was the man from the park. I froze. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. My legs locked in place, and I couldn't look away from him. He wasn't standing still this time, though. He was walking toward me, his slow, deliberate steps closing the distance between us with each passing second. His eyes were locked on mine, as if he had been waiting for this moment. I quickly turned my head, hoping he hadn't noticed me, but I could feel him. I could feel his gaze, even though I didn't dare to look back. Every step I took, he mirrored. He wasn't running or rushing. He moved at a pace that made it clear this wasn't an accident. He was following me. Panic rose in my chest as I picked up the pace. I wasn't sure if I was running away from him or running towards something, but all I could think was that I had to get away from him. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, my mind racing. What did he want from me? Why was he following me again? I turned a corner and found myself on a quieter street. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't even know why I had turned here, but it felt like the right thing to do. I glanced behind me, just a quick look. I couldn't help it. And there he was, still following, just a few paces behind me. But this time, there was something different, something new. The man's smile. I had never seen him smile before. He had always been so cold, so still, so calculating. But now, his mouth twisted upward, his lips curling into a grin that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't an expression of joy or warmth. It was the kind of smile that said, "I've been waiting for this moment." I turned again, my mind racing. My feet were moving faster, but my body felt like it was made of lead. I needed to get to safety, but I didn't know where safety was anymore. I darted into a nearby alleyway, hoping it would provide some shelter, some distance between me and him. I pressed my back to the cold brick wall, desperately trying to steady my breath, praying that he wouldn't follow. And yet, just as I thought I was alone, I heard it. His voice. "I told you, you can't escape." The words were chilling, like a whisper against my skin. They didn't come from the distance. They were close, too close. I turned around and there he was, standing in the alley, barely a few feet from me. His eyes glinted in the dim light, that same grin on his face. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nowhere to run. No one could hear me. I was trapped. For a moment, time stood still. I stared at him and he stared back at me, as if he was savoring the moment. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to say. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Just like that. It was over. I didn't move at first, still frozen in place, my mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. He was gone. Just like that. As if he hadn't been following me for days. As if his presence had never been suffocating me, always a step behind. I slowly made my way out of the alley and back to the main street. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, but still heavy with that lingering dread. I never saw him again after that night. He was gone. But the question stayed with me. What was his purpose? What did he want from me? Why did he follow me? And why did he let me go? I didn't have answers. I didn't even know if I ever would. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, somewhere, he was still out there, waiting, watching. Part 1, a normal night at home. It was one of those evenings when everything felt perfectly ordinary. I had just finished dinner, a simple meal I had prepared for myself, and was settling down on the couch to unwind. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of traffic outside. The kind of night you take for granted, when everything feels still and calm. I was living in a small townhouse on the outskirts of the city, a place that had been mine for a little over a year. The walls were thin, and sometimes I could hear my neighbours through the shared walls, but for the most part it was peaceful. I liked it that way. It was quiet enough to make me feel at ease, and after a long day at work, I craved the silence. The lights were dimmed and I was curled up on the couch with a book. There wasn't much on TV, so I figured I'd read a few chapters before going to bed. I had just turned the page when I heard it. A faint scratching sound. At first I assumed it was a mouse or maybe some small animal crawling through the walls. It wasn't unusual to hear things in an old house like this, especially one with creaky floors and aging wood. But as the sound continued, growing more distinct, I felt an uneasy sensation crawl up my spine. The scratching was coming from the door that led to the basement. I froze, my grip tightening around the book. I couldn't tell whether it was the wind or some other natural cause. Maybe there was an animal trapped down there, scratching at the door. But the more I listened, the more I started to feel an odd sense of dread. I stood up slowly, my feet moving almost against my will. The scratching stopped, as if it had sensed my movement. I hesitated by the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I should have ignored it, gone back to my book. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door just a crack. Nothing. The basement was dark, the stairs barely visible in the dim light from the hallway. The air smelled stale, like dust and old wood. I stepped back, reassuring myself that it was probably nothing. But then I heard it again, the scraping sound, but louder this time. I shut the door quickly, locking it behind me, my pulse pounding in my chest. It wasn't the noise that terrified me. It was the feeling that came with it. Something was down there. Something I wasn't supposed to know about. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, returning to the couch, but every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it. The sound of scratching, like something or someone was trying to get out. But no matter how many times I checked, there was nothing there. I tried to get some sleep that night, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. It was like there was something in the house with me, not just the noise, but the sensation. Eyes on me, even though I was alone. Growing panic. The next few days were filled with an eerie sense of tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right in the house. Every creak, every thud, every breeze that fluttered the curtains, it all seemed to be a sign, a signal that I wasn't alone. The scratching behind the basement door had become a regular occurrence, although I had tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a mouse scurrying about. But that wasn't the only thing that started to disturb me. At night, when I would lie in bed, it felt like there was something watching me. A subtle pressure in the room, like eyes trained on me from somewhere just beyond my line of sight. It wasn't a tangible sensation, just an overwhelming awareness that I wasn't truly alone. My instincts were telling me to get out, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. It wasn't the house I was afraid of, it was something in it. One night, I woke up to a soft, faint whisper. It was barely audible, like a breath against my ear, but I was certain I heard it. My skin prickled and I immediately sat up, the room bathed in the dim light of the night lamp. I scanned the room, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows stretching across the walls cast by the pale light. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, but the sensation of being watched remained. My eyes darted toward the door to the basement, the door that was now locked tight. I couldn't stop myself. The curiosity mixed with a growing fear drew me to it again. I stood up slowly, the creaky floorboards beneath my feet making me feel even more vulnerable. I crossed the room and stood in front of the door. I was frozen for a moment, the silence around me deafening, and then I heard it again, the scratching. This time it was louder, more frantic, as if something was desperate to get out. I backed away quickly, my breath catching in my throat. The feeling of dread washed over me like a cold wave. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, hoping that just hearing another voice would calm me down. "Hello?" His groggy voice answered after a few rings. "Hey, it's me. I don't know what's going on. Something's wrong with the house. I keep hearing these noises, and I feel like there's something in here with me." I could hear the panic creeping into my voice. "You're probably just stressed out," he said, his tone more comforting than I felt it should be. "It's an old house. You're hearing things. You're fine." But I wasn't fine. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was alive, that something within it was watching me, waiting. The call ended and I felt even more alone. I tried to go back to bed, but every time I closed my eyes, the scratching sounds echoed in my head. They had been growing more desperate, as if whatever was behind that door was now trying to get to me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, I decided I had to find out what was behind the basement door. I couldn't keep living in fear. I had to face it. With trembling hands, I grabbed a flashlight and stood in front of the door again. The scratch marks had been more pronounced now, the wood around the knob showing signs of wear, as if something had been pressing against it. I took a deep breath and unlocked it. The basement was dark, colder than the rest of the house. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the flashlight shaking in my hand. I felt my heart pounding in my chest with every step. The air in the basement was stale, musty, the smell of dampness and decay thick in the air. I swept the flashlight around the room, casting long shadows on the bare concrete walls. The space was mostly empty, just old boxes and unused furniture. Nothing out of the ordinary. I checked the corners, the ceilings, anything that might give me some indication of what I was feeling. The scratching had stopped once I entered the basement, but the silence was almost worse. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. And then I saw it. At the far end of the basement, partially obscured behind an old, rusted filing cabinet, was something I hadn't noticed before. A door. It was smaller than the main basement door, tucked into a corner, almost hidden by shadows. I approached it slowly, a shiver running down my spine. The door was slightly ajar, and there, on the floor in front of it, was a small pile of dried leaves and dirt. It looked out of place. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. The room beyond was tiny, almost claustrophobic, and in the far corner I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the floor, was a small mirror, but it wasn't like any mirror I had ever seen. It was cracked, the surface jagged, reflecting only half of the room. In the mirror's reflection, though, was something that wasn't in the room. Two glowing eyes. They stared at me from the cracked mirror, their cold light piercing through the darkness of the room. They were watching me, no doubt about it. I froze, unable to look away. It was like a trap, an invisible force keeping me rooted to the spot. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the reflection of the eyes vanished, and the mirror went dark. I backed away quickly, my heart racing. The cold, oppressive air in the room suddenly felt suffocating. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I didn't know what I had just seen. I didn't know what had been watching me. But I was done. I left the house that night. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with whatever was lurking in the shadows. I haven't been back since. The house remains abandoned, and I don't plan to return. I still hear the scratching sometimes late at night when I'm alone. And when I close my eyes, I still see those glowing eyes watching me from the cracked mirror. The worst part? I know I wasn't imagining it. Part 3. Climax and Aftermath. The days following my discovery of the mirror were a blur of anxiety and confusion. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. The house, the mirror, the eyes, everything kept replaying in my mind. It felt like I was losing control, slipping into something I couldn't understand. I thought about burning the house down, just to rid myself of whatever was lurking there. But I couldn't. I knew I had to face it, to understand what it was, even if I didn't want to. The nightmares started soon after. Each night I would dream of standing in the basement, staring at that cracked mirror. The eyes would appear again, glowing in the dark, but this time they weren't just reflections. They were alive. They moved, blinking, shifting, as though they were searching for something. Me. I would try to run, but my legs were made of stone and the house would change around me. The walls would bend, twist, and doors that weren't there before would open into darkness. It always ended the same way. I would hear the scratching, louder, faster, and then I would wake up, my body drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I couldn't take it anymore. I called a local paranormal investigator, someone recommended by a friend who claimed they could clear places of negative energy. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, not really, but I had to do something. The fear, the feeling of being watched was driving me mad. The investigator arrived the next afternoon. She was a woman in her late 30s, dressed in black with a quiet, no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't look like someone who believed in ghosts. She just looked like someone who had seen things she couldn't explain. "I felt it the moment I stepped inside," she said, scanning the room with a practiced eye. "This house is restless." Restless. The word sent a chill down my spine. "Where did you find the mirror?" she asked. She didn't wait for me to answer. "Show me." I led her down to the basement, my stomach tight. She moved quickly, her footsteps sure and confident, as if she had been in places like this before. When we reached the basement, she didn't pause or flinch. She walked straight to the door I had discovered, the small hidden one, and examined it carefully. "What's behind here?" she asked, her voice low. I told her everything. The scratching, the eyes, the mirror. When I mentioned the eyes, her face went pale for a split second, but it was so brief I almost missed it. She nodded and opened the door. The small room was as dark as I had left it. The mirror still sat in the far corner, cracked and silent, reflecting the empty space in front of it. "Who did you say lived here before?" she asked. I hesitated. "A family, a couple and their child. They left suddenly a few years ago. I never met them, but I heard rumors they had to move because of strange happenings in the house." "Strange happenings," she murmured. "That doesn't surprise me." She pulled out a small incense holder and began to light it, filling the room with the smell of sage and something sharper, almost metallic. As she worked, I couldn't help but glance at the mirror again. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a flicker, like movement, in its reflection. My pulse quickened, and I turned my head to look at the room. Nothing. She muttered something under her breath, and the air in the room grew colder. It was as though the temperature dropped by several degrees in a matter of seconds. The floor beneath me seemed to creak, like something was shifting in the shadows. "This place is pulling on itself," she said, her voice tight. "There's something here. Something that doesn't belong, and it's trapped." She paused, then added, "And it's been waiting for you." I froze. "What do you mean?" "The mirror," she said, "is a portal. Not a typical one, but a portal nonetheless. It's been waiting for someone to open it. You were curious, weren't you?" I nodded slowly. "I didn't mean to." "You're not the first," she said softly. "This house has a history. The previous tenants were too afraid to stay once they realized what had happened here. But you opened it. You let it in." I felt my chest tighten. My mouth went dry. "So, what do we do now? How do I fix this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt down in front of the mirror, staring into it with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, slowly, she reached her hand toward it. Before she could touch it, the scratching began again, louder than before. It was as if whatever was behind the mirror knew she was close. The walls vibrated with the noise, shaking the floor beneath us. "Get back!" she shouted. I stumbled away, my heart racing, my mind a blur of terror. But before I could move far enough, the mirror flickered. The reflection of the room seemed to warp, and the eyes appeared again. This time they weren't just reflections. They were alive, glowing with a sickly yellow hue, staring at me through the cracked glass. "Close your eyes!" she shouted, her voice rising in fear. But I couldn't. My body was frozen, my gaze locked on those eyes. I could feel their pull, like they were drawing me in, dragging me closer to the mirror. Suddenly, everything went dark. The mirror, the room, everything vanished. And for a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the basement, alone. The room was still, the air heavy with a cold silence. The mirror was gone. The paranormal investigator was nowhere to be found. There were no signs of struggle, no trace of her presence. She had simply disappeared, like the mirror. I ran upstairs in a blind panic, but when I reached the living room, everything felt wrong. The shadows seemed darker, the silence thicker, and then I heard it, the scratching. It was coming from behind me. I turned around slowly, and there, in the reflection of the window, I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. They were watching, always watching. It's been weeks since that night. I'm still not sure what happened to the investigator, or what happened to me, for that matter. It's as though I've stepped into a nightmare that won't end. I left the house immediately after I saw those eyes in the reflection. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stay in that place, not with whatever was lurking there. I didn't even bother to pack. I just ran, grabbing only my wallet and phone, and I never looked back. I haven't been back to the house since. I tried to put it out of my mind, to move on, but it's impossible. The strange pull of the house, the unsettling feeling of being watched, it won't let me go. It follows me, just out of reach, always lurking on the edge of my consciousness. I can't sleep without seeing those eyes, glowing in the dark, waiting. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the scratching. And sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can feel someone standing just behind me, just out of sight, watching. I don't know what it was that followed me from that house, but I know one thing for certain. It's not over. Whatever was in the mirror, whatever was watching me from that cracked glass, is still out there. I can feel it, even now. Its presence is too close, too real. Maybe it's waiting for me to come back. Maybe it's waiting for something else. But I won't go back. Not now, not ever. But I know this. Whatever it is, it's still watching. And it won't stop until it gets what it wants. Maybe one day, I'll hear that scratching again. Or maybe I'll see those eyes one more time, glowing in the shadows. But until then, I'll keep one eye open. Always.